decision. And the new WBC Super Lightweight Female Champion of the World.
Motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Sergey Kovalev versus Alvarez Part 2. Let's talk about the fight. Well, I'll tell you this much. Sergey Kovalev, ahead of the fight, ahead of this rematch, he didn't have my trust. I don't know if he had yours. I don't know if you guys felt confident that given Sergey Kovalev's current state of situations inside the ring and outside, I don't know if you guys felt that this was a fight that he was going to win, but I myself can say that no, I had no trust in Sergey to win this fight. I wasn't sure what kind of Sergey Kovalev are we going to get. It being that you've got all these legal troubles hanging over your head. To top it all off, you've probably had about 3 trainers in the last 3 or 4 years or something like that. You've been bouncing around from trainer to trainer, and I wasn't sure that you've had enough time with Buddy McGurt for it to make a noticeable difference in the ring. And I'll say that, you know what? I think it made a difference. I think that the experience of Buddy McGurt, the tutelage of Buddy McGurt, it made enough of a difference that Sergey was more composed in this fight, more poised in this fight,
focused,
and put out a better performance overall as a result. Let's talk about the conditioning of Sergey Kovalev. Sergey Kovalev's conditioning over time has become something that people don't really want to bank on. I myself, ahead of this fight, didn't trust his conditioning, his energy reserves, and his ability to take a shot. I didn't trust it. That's a part of the reason I just didn't feel confident that he would win this thing. But in this fight, now that we've seen it, we can make our assessment as to where his conditioning was. And I'll say that he's shown better conditioning than he has in recent memory. Last night, he showed good conditioning. He took certain punches that got through well, certain punches upstairs, and more surprisingly, certain punches downstairs. You know, it's not like Alator made a conscious effort to consistently go to Sergey's body. It wasn't a honed attack. It wasn't a focused attack. And we'll get into why that was a little later on in the video. But for now, you know, looking at Sergey's conditioning and how he took some of the punches that went upstairs and some of the punches that Alator threw downstairs, because there were a few times in the course of the fight where Alator did go downstairs. He just wasn't very consistent with that effort. But there were times when he did go down there, and for the most part, Sergey really took the punches well. Between rounds, in the corner, Sergey appeared to be doing what looked like breathing exercises. He was taking deep breaths, and they didn't look like deep breaths as a result of exhaustion, so much as a breathing exercise to help him maintain his composure, to relax. And that's in keeping with the instruction that he was receiving from Buddy McGurt. Buddy McGurt was telling him round by round, just relax and keep touching him.
boxing.
But the focal point did seem to be on Sergey Kovalev relaxing, thereby maintaining his composure, maintaining his poise, and using his boxing,
primarily.
His boxing, key element, his boxing skill to win the fight, as opposed to trying to steamroll the guy. And this kind of a strategy, this kind of instruction from Buddy McGurt, it might have lended itself to Sergey Kovalev's overall condition throughout the different stages of the fight, the 4 different quarters of the fight, that you might have been expecting that, you know, maybe Sergey looks okay in the early rounds, but he's going to fade down the stretch. Well, that didn't happen, and I think that's a result of him relaxing,
among other
him
things,
being more poised, more controlled, and not looking to steamroll the guy. The expenditure of energy early in the fight plays a big factor later in the fight. And later in this fight, Sergey Kovalev was able to maintain. He was able to work at the same rate, at the same pace, and maintain control overall of what's happening in the ring. I mean, you don't even need to ask who the ring general was in this fight. Round by round, it was Sergey Kovalev that really was in control of all the action. And his conditioning seemed to be holding up. Now, yet another element of that, you know, why did Sergey Kovalev's conditioning seem to hold up? Was it all just the psychological factor that Buddy McGurt was bringing to the table? You know, the instruction. Because Sergey's a finished product. He's already been a world champion, and he's already got a good amateur background. So you have a good idea of what he's capable of. In that way, he's a finished product. So if Buddy is contributing something to the situation, it's likely psychological. It's likely
mental.
Getting Sergey in the right kind of headspace, because the reality of it is, you two haven't been working with each other for very long. That puts a cap on just how big of a difference you can make in one camp. He's not going to suddenly become a different fighter after just one camp with you. You know, it takes more time than that. So if the instruction from Buddy McGurt were any kind of a contributing factor to how Sergey performed, it's likely from a psychological perspective because Sergey's already been in situations with different kinds of fighters. He's a finished product. All you've really got to do is get him in the right headspace. There was another interesting tidbit that was mentioned in the commentary from Tim Bradley, who was calling the fight alongside Andre Ward and, someone else. And Tim Bradley mentioned how, Buddy actually said that Sergey Kovalev doesn't actually need much time in camp before he starts to sharpen up. This guy's already been a world champion, so you don't have to push him the way you would have to push a greener, younger fighter.
Makes sense.
I think that this approach might have manifested itself
in the form of poise.
This guy's not telling you to overextend or overexert yourself in camp. He already realizes that, you're in your mid-30s and you've been a world champion. You're a complete fighter already. You just need to know what to focus on. That's Buddy's contribution to Sergey's demeanor. And in affecting Sergey's demeanor towards the fight as such, you get a more controlled fighter who's not overexerting himself round by round. Thus, his condition will appear to be holding up because he's not blowing his load, punching himself out, trying to take the guy's head off in the first half of the fight. I think that's a part of the reason that Sergey's condition, overall, the appearance of that condition seemed better than it has in the last couple of fights. And yet another contributing factor to why Sergey Kovalev didn't fade down the stretch, took the punches well. Another
layer of that
contributing factor might have been Sergey's implementation. Understand that Sergey Kovalev is a finished product. This is a guy that has a variety of tools in the tool chest. It's just that the people at home and the people in attendance, they get accustomed to seeing certain tools because, well, those are the tools that grab the most attention. Those tools being punching power. But Sergey Kovalev is a guy that comes from a very good amateur background, so there are layers to the fighter. It seems that they chose to focus on the boxing more than the punching.
How so?
That is, more along the lines of the strategy more than the power. I noticed in this fight that Sergey Kovalev, round by round, consistently, was firing very short punches. Sergey Kovalev did not appear to be a guy who's looking for a knockout. If one happens, great. But that's not what he's looking for, and that's not what he's going out there doing round by round. It appeared like Sergey Kovalev's focus was simply to pepper Alvarez, keeping himself busy in the process. That is, you keep yourself busy, and you keep touching this guy with these short punches. Emphasis on short punches. We'll get into why there's an emphasis on that, and how that affected the fight. But as you're just keeping busy touching this guy, you're disarming him in the process and giving the judges who are scoring the fight the appearance that you are the busier fighter, you are the ring general, and you are winning all these rounds. And, that might be a part of the reason that, look, I only gave Alvarez one round, and that was the third round. Every other round, it seemed like Sergey's the busier fighter out there. He's landing more punches. He's the one in control. I attribute that to Sergey Kovalev consistently going out there and throwing short punches. Let's talk about the virtue of those short punches and what effect they have on the fight. Well, when you're firing those short punches, for starters, they're more defensible because the window of opportunity to counter a punch that isn't traveling very far, the window of opportunity to counter that is a very small window. And a part of the reason that it's a very small window to try to counter a short punch is because it's not traveling very far to get to you. Thus, he can bring that hand right back very quickly.
And follow up.
2, short punches
are tight.
Don't travel very far to get to you, thus they don't take very much time to get to you. So you can fire a short punch and follow up with another one rather quickly, further limiting, further hampering someone's ability to counter you. The punches are fluid. They're not traveling very far to get to you. They're coming in rapid succession. So, if you were to try to open up to try to counter the guy, it's likely that another short punch would be coming right behind it and it would nail you. This effectively disarms a guy. This makes a guy gun-shy. This may have been a part of the reason that Eleider Alvarez gave such an uninspired performance. Round by round, I was listening to the commentary from Andre Ward, from Tim Bradley, and they touched on how Eleider Alvarez really isn't doing enough out there, and I'm of the opinion that if Eleider wasn't doing much out there, it's because Sergey wasn't giving him the opportunity to do much out there. Long range, you see Sergey Kovalev using his jab, a very good jab, and he's keying his way in with that jab, so that mid-range he can start to fire short punches. And those short punches are effectively disarming Eleider Alvarez.
Can't counter him.
Eleider might want to get into the phone booth with Sergey Kovalev. He might want to do that, but he can't because he's constantly defending himself against these short punches. Thus, you're not making it into your desired range to cause the damage that you want to cause. We all know that Sergey's Achilles heel is his midsection. So if you get in the phone booth with this guy and you target his midsection, you go to his body.
From the inside.
That'd be your best bet to really take something out of him. Well, Eleider couldn't do that because mid-range he's being peppered with short punches.
Constantly.
These are short punches that Sergey's not loading up on, so they're not coming at a great expenditure of his energy. There's not a lot of salt in those short punches. But those short punches are very hard to counter because they're coming in at a fast pace, and they're being strung together with other short punches that make up the combination. Thus, you're consistently seeing Eleider Alvarez outworked. But he's being outworked because he's being disarmed.
Two-pronged process.
I'll tell you, it's a very interesting fight to dissect because in Sergey Kovalev ahead of the fight and after the fight, what we're looking at is a guy who before faded down the stretch, but in this fight actually had the conditioning to go into the championship rounds. We're looking at a guy who was knocked out by this same guy in his last fight, but ended up dominating him and outboxing him in almost every round in the rematch. So it's an interesting fight to dissect because the question you're faced with is, what exactly was different in this fight about Sergey Kovalev? Because he completely dominated this guy. So what changed? What was different? And really, it's a combination of things. It's the instruction of Buddy McGurt, a bit of fine-tuning in terms of implementation.
Box the guy.
And less of a focus on being the quote-unquote crusher and going back to being a boxer, a good boxer, with a good amateur background.
With many tools.
Just so happens to be quite accomplished as a professional. And today he stands as a 3-time world champion. He has regained his WBO title, which puts him right back in the mix of everything. Post-fight, they asked Sergey Kovalev, what does he want to do? And he immediately alluded to unifications. Unifications with the other champions that are out there. And he said a couple of names, but the one that stood out the most to me was the Artur Beterbiev fight. Those guys have got history. They've got history that goes all the way back to the Amis. Good amount of the reason that a lot of people became so high on Beterbiev so soon in his career, even though the guy didn't have very many fights, a part of the reason that people became high on him is because they heard the story of how Artur had beaten Sergey in the Amis. Well, a lot of us would like to see how that plays out in the pros. The thing is, in spite of a performance like this, you gotta realize that no matter what, styles make fights. What just took place with Eleider, what just happened with him, that's what happened with Eleider. And Artur is a different fighter with a different style that has different physical dimensions and attributes. Thus, one fight doesn't foreshadow the other. In Artur, you would be facing a different set of challenges than what you just faced in Eleider. Eleider's got a respectable punch. Not taking anything away from him. I mean, he must have a respectable punch to have knocked out Sergey Kovalev in the first fight the way that he did. So Eleider does have some punch. But he's not the same puncher that Artur is. Don't ever be fooled. There's levels to this thing. And in the realm of punching power, I would not put Eleider Alvarez in the same realm as in Artur. The timing is everything. When a fight takes place has a great impact on how the fight plays out. So, maybe in previous instances where conversations regarding Sergey Kovalev and Artur Beterbiev, maybe in previous instances in previous years, Sergey might have been given the edge, because he might have been in a better place. Whereas today, while he may have regained his WBO title, how sure are you guys that he beats Artur Beterbiev? I mean, on one end, I gather that Sergey would have to use a similar approach with Beterbiev to what he just did with Eleider, in the sense that you're going to have to box Beterbiev. You don't want to have to match him blow for blow. You don't want to punch with this guy. You do not want to be subject to his power because he may be able to match yours or exceed it, and you don't want to take that chance. Not with this guy, because this guy's not as weathered and war-torn as you are. He hasn't suffered his first career loss yet, so all the momentum is on his side, in which case, this ain't the kind of puncher you want to get into a war with. You're going to have to use your poise, your fine-tuning, your skills, and your experience to outwit this guy, because if you go trying to punch with him, that could be a mistake. So I imagine that a similar, not exact, but a similar strategy would have to be employed in a fight with Artur, to where Sergey is primarily using his boxing acumen to beat him, with less of a focus on loading up on punches and trying to take the guy's head off. That's not going to work. It might not. You might really need to box this guy
and disarm him
to get the win. In that way, there might have to be some similarities in the strategy that Sergey used for Eleider in a fight with Artur. There might be some similarities, but do realize that Artur is a far bigger puncher than Eleider. Thus, it might prove to be a more daunting task. I mean, this guy can inflict quite a bit of damage in a very short amount of time. That's what makes it challenging. That's where the fine-tuning, the tweaks, and the subtleties would have to be for Sergey to actually win a fight like that. You look at the other champions that are out there, guys like Dmitry Bivol, Now, he also has a very respectable punch. I'm not quite sure that his punch is on the level of an Artur Beterbiev or even a Sergey Kovalev, but he does pack a respectable punch. But what he has that they don't quite have is very good hand speed. His hand speed does appear to be a lot quicker than theirs. So you factor in his hand speed with his very good textbook boxing skills and athleticism, and this is yet another guy who hasn't suffered a career loss yet. He's nowhere near weathered and war-torn like Sergey is, and that fight in and of itself poses different kinds of challenges. You know, Artur, Sergey, Dmitry, these guys do operate from different ranges for different reasons at different times. They've got different physical attributes, but they're all solid boxers. And that's not even counting the lineal champion of the weight class, Alexander Voskin. You know, I'll tell you, the Eastern Europeans have really got the run of the place up there at 175 pounds. That division is on fire. And I like that Sergey Kovalev put that out there, that, you know, it's time for unifications. He's got no problem with it. I like that he put that out there. But what I don't like are his odds to beat those guys. Because those guys are bigger threats to Sergey than Elater just was. That's the truth of it.
Ain't it?
Those guys got skills like Elater, more or less, maybe more than less, but they're also bigger punchers than Elater. Think about it. Elater's really not the puncher that those guys are, and yet he spent most of last night's fight looking for one big shot to end the night. And in between the opening round and the final round, you know, he did connect with some right hands, at least 2 by my count, and he had some mild success to the body. It wasn't consistent, but he had some success there, and yet he's really not the puncher that they are. So you put one of them in his place, landing the kinds of shots that he landed last night on Sergey, and it's a very different situation, you know, it's a very different conversation. I mean, at minimum, what you have to acknowledge is that these guys really do pose different challenges to Sergey than Elater just did, don't they? So, while the addition of Buddy McGurt might have been conducive towards breathing life back into Sergey Kovalev's career, what's left of it, while that might have breathed some life back into it, and while he may now be a 3-time world champion, he has regained his WBO world title. All those things in mind, I'm still not quite convinced that he's going to go out there and beat one of these other undefeated champions, because they've got the kind of skills that he's got, and they've got some of the same kind of power that he's got, but time is on their side. They have the momentum. Light heavyweight is definitely one of the more interesting and stacked, talent, action-packed divisions in the whole sport of boxing. But it's for just that reason that I'm not convinced that Sergey Kovalev
could dominate the weight class.
In spite of last night's fight, I'm not quite convinced of how much success he's going to have against one of those other champions. Call me crazy.